Enjoy local voices. Enjoy local opinions. All on one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts, featuring some of the DC area's best personalities, pundits, and provocateurs. Earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts you love instantly. With new programs being added every week, don't hesitate. Download Podcast DC now for free. Available in the App Store or in Google Play. Podcast DC. Listen local.
Say It Loud Network presents Corner Table Talk.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Corner Table Talk. Today's a special day, and we're going to do things a little bit differently. I've got Ambassador Shabazz, who's going to join me for the main portion of the program today, because we are so honored and just really thrilled to have in our midst Danny Glover, who is a dear friend of both of ours. Of course, everyone knows him as an award-winning actor, film director, political activist, all-around brilliant man. Danny has just been involved in so many things over the years. I'll just list a couple of them, and we're going to dive into a few of them as we speak. But going back to the late 80s, in fact, 89, Danny was one of the founding members of Artists for Free South Africa, which became Artists for New South Africa once Nelson Mandela was freed, but instrumental in that fantastic cause, and definitely helped to bring some attention to something that needed the attention. And Danny was a big part of that. Danny was also one of the original superstars in Robert Earl's group of Planet Hollywood celebrities that launched back in the early 90s. So we're going to talk about that. I remember Danny inviting me to a Rodeo Drive Planet Hollywood event in Beverly Hills where they shut the whole state. You shut Rodeo Drive down, you got some money. So we're going to talk about that. And more recently, Danny joined the workers in Bessemer, Alabama, in the support of a union effort that ultimately did not work. But at the request of the workers at Amazon, Danny joined them and brought some much needed attention to some issues that they're trying to raise there. So we've got lots to talk about. I'll stop because I could go on and on with Danny's accolades and acknowledgments, but we'd rather hear him live and in living vocal color. So Danny, what's happening, man?
Hey, I'm doing all right. I'm feeling great. It's great to talk to you and be on this podcast. Someone told me, I hear the voice. I know the voice.
Yeah,
you can't hide from that,
Yeah, and I'm occasionally closing my eyes just so I can visualize. But we all know what you look like, man, and so we're thrilled. The ambassador and I are thrilled to have you here. So before we get started, Ambassador, you just want to say hello real quick?
Yes,
to
I'm just so excited. Just the notion that this was forthcoming, and speaking to him, I guess, last month, and connecting the conversation to make sure this date was secured. So welcome aboard, Mr. Glover.
I am so honored to be aboard here, both with you and Brad, and that we go back a ways.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Danny. So we kick things off with what I call short order questions. That's a little play on restaurant terminology, fast food. So these are just easy questions. They shouldn't cause you to strain your brain too much, because I know you're just warming up. So we want to give you a chance to get rolling. So what is your morning regimen, whether you're at home or on the road? So what do you do, Danny, to get rolling in the morning?
Well, to get rolling in the morning, normally it is try to get on some sort of machine, whether it's a stationary bike or an elliptical machine, something in the morning to get me going. And sometimes sometimes in this moment in my life, I get a little lazy. So I'm getting a little lazy, but I can remember in those moments where once I get moving and getting and feeling sweat, wherever it is, I'm on a roll there, and I think my day starts.
Yeah.
It relaxes me. It in some sense gives me a sense of confidence. And just to do that sometimes, just getting up in the morning, just doing some exercise, gives me a sense of confidence in myself and gets me to begin to move through the day. I try not to get on the phone before that, but sometimes I can't. I can't help that because once I get on the phone, then my day begins right there with a conversation or thinking about something. But I need and require some time before I get, as I wake up, to imagine myself in motion. Yeah. So that's the question. I have a long answer to imagine myself.
It's a good one. And I'm going to tell all those people out there to not call Danny too early in the morning. Let him get on his treadmill and on his stationary bike, and break a little sweat before you jump on him for all the answers. So Danny, what is in heavy rotation on your playlist these days? What are you listening to?
I'm listening to a lot of Jimi Hendrix.
Really? Okay. Jimmy.
I love Jimi Hendrix. I got one opportunity to see him, but I sometimes, I just wanted Voodoo Child was on my mind. Mm. And I pulled up, or it could be, this morning also was the Isley Brothers, Atlantis. I love Atlantis with the Isley Brothers. It's the young Isley Brothers who wrote that. But you all know that Jimi Hendrix once was part of the Isley Brothers group early on in his career, and Little Richard as well. So yeah, that was something old is always brings me, energizes me in the moment. And in that moment, if I want to go somewhere else, it's always going to be somewhere near John Coltrane and Miles Davis as well.
Yeah, man, nothing wrong with any of those names on that list. And yeah, Ernie Isley, no doubt, was influenced by the time that Jimmy spent with them, man, and his guitar playing sure shows it. But love all of those names.
Absolutely.
Where do you go for your news, or what do you read or watch where you feel you get the most balanced reporting? I know you're a man of the world and you're paying attention to a lot of things, and news can be biased. But what do you look to for your information?
Oh, there are various ways in which I like listening to the news, and I listen to often free speech radio a great deal. I'm going to find out something. I'm going to learn something. Something's going to, and that's in Los Angeles, KPFK or KPFA in San Francisco here. And I want something. I want to hear something. I want to hear people talking in conversation about what has happened. And often, and those sources, those news outlets provide me a sense of what is happening in the world. And I go to also something called Portside, which I look at sometime during the day. And there's so many different things that are happening in the world. I want to kind of differentiate between, and let me use the word not in a derogatory way, the chatter and what is really happening. So I think sometimes you have to distinguish between the chatter and what is really going on in the world. What are the things that I think I need to be thinking about as I move through my day? Not simply an incident, but also a movement of currency about trying to figure out the world beyond what we're often told to respond to, if that makes any sense.
Makes a lot of sense, especially given this past year when, you were afraid to turn away from the news. So your brain gets filled with all of that stuff that's coming at you. And I think, if anything, we all learned how essential it is to be able to sift through the noise to the stuff that you really need to listen to and pay attention to. So thank you for that, Danny. Person, past or present, that inspired your activism?
Well, certainly my parents were first. My parents were this. You can imagine this young couple marrying just at the end of World War II and coming together and finding work and coming of age, young couple coming of age with the emergence of the civil rights movement and their involvement as activists within the postal union. They were post office workers and everything else. Their involvement and the way in which my mother from the Deep South, and I remember this, Brad, so much, and you too, Dr. Singh-Abbas, I remember so much watching them, the world through their eyes by what they watched. Mm-hmm. I remember the Montgomery bus boycott. Now I'm 9 years old then. I'm saying, who are these people? Because my mother and father are paying attention to what they're doing in that moment, in that simple act of defiance. They're paying attention to that. And so that was my first step in that world, as I heard them talk within their union, within the conversations, because at that particular point in my life, a large number of the workforce with the U.S. Postal Service was African American. So I saw these people in and out. We were living in the projects initially. I saw these people coming up to the projects in our home, sitting down, having meetings, having conversations. That was explicitly the first time, a movement of my politicalization. And then it came throughout being a student activist. It came throughout meeting artists who work on behalf of, and so many of them, behind justice. I mean, I consider you a part of that family too, Ambassador Shabazz. You too, Brad, as a part of that audience, a part of people who will constantly have their minds and their ideas and their thoughts on what is happening beyond the news as well.
Well, thank you for that, Danny. As you were speaking, and I've been thinking about this a bit lately too. I feel like my generation kind of, as the beneficiaries of the civil rights movement, and as you're talking about your folks and what resonated with you at such a young age, I think my generation we sat back a little bit in that we benefited from so much of that work. We got the jobs. We got to go to school. We got to go to camp in some cases. I mean, we did not feel the same pressure, I think, early on to carry the torch, if you will. But I think we've all woken up a lot in the last few years. And I don't want to speak for the ambassador, but I know that I have felt like need to pick up the pace a little bit on running my leg of the relay. Ambassador, do you have any of those thoughts?
Yes, I think that what you said is certain. We are beneficiaries of the beneficiary. And I think that it's silence for about 25, 30 years between our children and now. And so the things that Mr. Glover has relayed from the eyes of a child watching his parents is really the bequeathing we have to do all the time, generation to generation, our value, our what matters, and how we pass it on to the next. It is our responsibility, whether it's our child or not, to do that. And I know that he's the kind of person, you, Mr. Glover, are the kind of person that makes sure that whatever you learn, you share. And that's always been one of the wonderful engagements I've gotten to experience in our decades of friendship as well.
Yesterday I was on a call, a Zoom call with something about over 150 students who were at my alma mater, San Francisco State. And they wanted to know about the strike of 1968, the student strike, the longest student strike in the history of any major college in this country. I was a part of that as a member of the Black Student Union and a member of the Central Committee of the Black Student Union. It was an enormous moment in my life, and it set the tone for a great deal of who I am now and the things that concerned me. And it was amazing as I met with and spoke along with on the panel with other members, white and black and Hispanic and Asian, who were part of this extraordinary collaboration of students, along with a faculty, along with community, who demanded a school of ethnic studies. So it is the only school of ethnic studies in the country at San Francisco State University. So I was listening to that and certainly participating in that and drawing out some of the parallels of what we see today, and the importance of understanding that movements come along. They begin to translate themselves with each generation. As Paul Robeson says, each generation makes its own history and is judged by that history it makes. So on that particular point, these students have to realize, and we as citizens have to realize, that we're making our own history. Every single thing that we do, are the ideas that we adopt, the response to the actions of not only those people in the past, but response to what is happening in the moments in the service of justice, in the service of justice. And that becomes that. And certainly, Ambassador Shabazz's father was there at his moment within his generation, and others have been that. And that's the legacy that we stand on. Those are the backs that we stand on as well.
Yeah, Danny, it's so good, man, just to hear you. And it makes me grateful that of course, that you agreed to come on and speak with us, but for the medium of a podcast that allows us, we've had lots of conversations, you and I, we've spent time together. I know you've had conversations with Ambassador Shabazz, but for others to hear your voice in this kind of an intimate setting, I think is just a very unique way for your message and your insights to be delivered. So thank you again, man, for taking the time. So we're going to dive in here. We've got a few things we want to try to get to. We're going to bounce around a little bit. My relationship with you, Danny, goes back over 20 years. I remember meeting you in the early 90s, and we actually flew together. You had an idea or were inspired to bring African cuisine into the forefront in terms of a dining option here in the U.S. And we flew down to meet with Robert Earl, the creator of Planet Hollywood, the gentleman who ultimately expanded Hard Rock Cafe as well. Real genius of a guy. But Danny, you were way ahead of, because West African cuisine is like the pick these days of food to really kind of find its way onto a lot of menus. But, we're going back into the 90s where you thought that was something that should happen. So I guess I want to ask you, what first got you interested? When did you first experience African cuisine and where?
Well, I have to credit a great deal, so many things, being at San Francisco State, the inclusion of students from around Africa, particularly West Africa, whether Nigeria or Ghana or Senegal or Mali, all those particular countries was the real, the real beauty of food as well. And there's several people. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my wife at the time, Shaki Bomani, as a part of that introduction or acculturation of that through art, because you're not only talking about cuisine, you're talking about art as well. And the influence of art within that, the influence of being connected to movements, those movements, and understand those movements and the impact of those movements, not only within the continent, but with all those impact of the descendants of African descendants who are now dispersed over the Western Hemisphere and in the world. And the impact, all of that had some sort of reflection on that, and then also putting on for the first time an African boo-boo, which in that kind of framework as well. All those things happen at a time when I think we were talking in general about our relationship with Africa. As African, as formerly enslaved Africans, our relationship to Africa, a lot of that was happening in my generation, and it was a point of reference in my generation as well. And so I think on that, and then suddenly you can think about peanut, we call it peanut butter, but peanuts, but groundnut stew. You can think about Yassa, Chebijin out of Mali and Senegal, and there are other kind of ways in which the influence and the delicacy and the taste, the sensorial sense of African food as well, from smell to the way in which fish is transformed in the different ways, or the way chicken is transformed in a different way than we normally know it, and it was just that there's a saying. It's a saying about wanting to know who people are. And you have to in that song, you have to want to know who they are by how they see themselves, through their culture, through their art, through their food, through language, through expressions and all of that. I think that moment was an extraordinary moment in my own maturation. And I'm sure thousands and thousands and thousands and millions of others as well of African descent.
Well, Danny, this year, with all of the emphasis on restaurants and a lot more conversation around Black-owned restaurants and ultimately Black cuisine, African-American cuisine, its origin, the diaspora has become a part of the narrative. But you will be pleased to know, and this is an interesting note, that the one of the hottest restaurants right now in Paris is the chef there is a gentleman. His name is Maurice Sacco. His parents are from Senegal, and he's a 6'7", very telegenic African brother who is just rocking France's world. So next time you're in Paris, you're going to have to go by and check him out, man, for sure.
I can't wait to get to Paris.
Yeah, man. So, the last movie, Danny, that I saw you in, I actually watched a couple of times because it just moved me, man. It was such a warm, tender movie. And that's the Last Black Man in San Francisco. And you and I talked not too long ago and touched on this briefly, you, myself, and Ambassador Shabazz. But I'm curious, it was such a tender film, and your role was just the centerpiece of it for me. But, as you look, you're familiar with that part of the country, that part of California, the Fillmore district. When you think about the idea, the concept of gentrification and what happens in the communities as they start to disperse, but just the word itself. I mean, I guess there's some inevitability to it, right? It's money, it's properties of value and what have you, things are going to change. But what do you think about the word gentrification, and how did that film resonate with you?
It was these two young men who gave the script to me. And say, and they call me now Mr. G. Mr. G, you got to be in our film, And I read the script, and I'm thinking about those places that I lived in those places. Brad, I lived in those communities. There's a scene in it where the young man is on the balcony smoking a cigarette. That's 500 steps at the most from this church I grew up in. And so I always wondered what that house was on the corner. And it was a mansion. It was a mansion on the corner, that house was, and all the rest of the community adjacent to it was responsive to that people who owned that mansion. Now, my church, what I grew up in, I thought from my conveyance my understanding that my congregation built that church. No, they didn't. They just occupied that church and took that church and transformed that church in that had been built somewhere after at the end of the 19th century. And it blew me away when I saw that, because I never saw the relationship to my relationship to that mansion in that church in that context before. If you understand what I've kind of drawn this picture and everything else. Mm-hmm. So I just think that there's so much. I grew up in the Western Addition. My family were part of the migration of African descendants. The Fillmore, we talk about the Fillmore as a traditional Black community in San Francisco, and the migration patterns that came specifically during and after World War II. That pushed African Americans west, whether it was further, even more so, to Los Angeles and Southern California or Northern California, and they pushed them. My mother, who had grown up in the South, in the Deep South, my grandparents' life, the almost 100 years that they lived, was between two small towns, Louisville, Georgia, and Rennes. They're 14 miles from each other. Imagine that. And the circumference of their life took place for almost 100 years in that area, because before that, their parents, after the end of slavery, their connection after the end of slavery were part of that. And so my mom was the first one to move beyond that. Not simply the first one, but to move out west. We were the only, I had no relatives out west when I came up, when I was born. Not one. Mm. But if you go to New York, that East Coast, that corridor, which they traveled up to New York, or they stayed where they were, moved around in that area in the South. So when I think about the movement, when I think about a gentrification, or when I think about the unique sense of how we make what we do, how we transport our ideas, our culture, our stories in that process. When I see gentrification, I see the loss of that, the loss of those stories. I still go to those areas. I still walk down those streets. They're not the same street. I still drive by there and remember a moment in my own life, or remember a moment that I may have read about, or remember people, because I live generally in the same neighborhood that since I was 11 years old. Mm. I lived 12 blocks from where I grew up at. My parents bought the house when I was 11 years old. So all these things about gentrification, that something is lost in this process, and the sense of community. Now that happens to poor communities that are always in transition. That doesn't happen in wealthy communities. The wealthy communities are wealthy. What they advance is the advancement of new wealth coming into those communities. They don't go through the process of gentrification. They're not defined in that saying it's movable or it's removable as we are. We have people said one of the fortunate thing that has happened with the mission, well, the identity of the mission, which is Latinx, the identity comes from Mission Dolores. It's the first settlement outside of the First Nation people, the first settlement of foreigners in the country. So the identity of the mission has some level of gentrification, but it doesn't have the same level that has happened with formerly enslaved Africans. Right. Because what do you speak when you think about the mission? What was the first language, European language spoken in California? Not English, Spanish. When you think about the mission and you think about that translation that's happened that we're always going through, and whenever we think about Latinx people, they're always going through that and always talking about whether they're the first ones who came here. They were here before the English. There are places that movement of formerly enslaved African is a different phenomenon. But when they get there, they make the most remarkable culture, the most remarkable food, the most remarkable sense of place and space. That's incredible. You know, my dad came of age. I had come from Kansas City. He loved San Francisco because he came of age in the Fillmore, the Black community. He came of age when there was a prominent African-American presence in San Francisco, a prominent African-American, an energized African, politicized African presence that he and my mother were part of.
Well, that we saw happen throughout the North, right? We saw Harlem, we saw Detroit, yes. San Francisco, certainly LA, and the possibility of seeing those cultural hubs diminish or dilute is a tough one. So that's something that, we often talk about here. But, Danny, you bring up slavery. I know you're the great grandson of a former slave, Mary Brown, who was freed in 1863. In 2019, you, Ta-Nehisi Coates, testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee about reparations and proposed the committee to review. And I tell you, man, watching you two, Ta-Nehisi that day in 5 minutes summed up about 400 years as poignantly as any person could possibly.
He's great.
Wasn't he phenomenal, man?
He's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Danny, you said something that, that just really, I had to write it down and I wanted to bring it up today and just maybe get you to comment. But you said the reckoning of a crime against humanity that is foundational to the development of democracy, a national reparations policy is a moral, democratic, and economic imperative. Do you want to just share a little bit of your thinking about what we're talking about here and share your thoughts with us on this?
We hear about reparations and we use the word and certainly we understood there's been reparations and historical reparations for harm done to various people, whether it's Jewish people, whether it's Japanese people, citizens in here who had their land taken away from them and in turn during World War II. And there are other ways in which there have been forms of reparation in the sense, I think the sense of reparations within certain frameworks has to be understood from the vantage point of the context of what wrong was done. What wrong was done. The first engine of the Industrial Revolution was what? Cotton. The first engine of the Industrial Revolution of that. And it made a poor country, which came into existence, its first Congress came in 1789. It made its first, that country wealthy because of cotton. At the same time that this country came into existence, a couple of things happened. One of the things that happened was that British industrialists had developed a machine that took cotton, which had been grown for centuries in Kashmir, India, all over the place cotton had been grown. The United States wasn't endemic to just the United States. It was grown all over the world. It took cotton, transferred it into thread and material that faster than ever by human hands. Cotton used to be a luxury item. Industrialization, industrial revolution made it a cheap item, a transportable item, an item in which it overtook wool itself. Now, wool came to be able to prosper, of course, because of the enclosure laws in Europe and everything else, where when people were farmers and they were planting food and everything else, they were moved to the city. because it became more profitable to have sheep and wool and produce that. That became a commodity. So cotton becomes a commodity, and it becomes a commodity here where it's grown abundantly. And who are the instruments in the production of that? Formerly enslaved, and not formerly, then enslaved African that created that wealth. Robeson, so many other people talk about the wealth, enormous wealth. You know, the majority, before the Civil War, the majority of millionaires were where? In the Deep South. Cotton. I think, and from that vantage point, it gave birth to the rest of the Industrial Revolution. Now, people want to say, well, that's in the past and everything else, but the harm done to African descendants, the harm done to formerly enslaved Africans is and they're remarkable, enormous, remarkable from slavery to freedom is the most inspiring, one of the most inspiring stories in human history. They're remarkable there, and yet they still, and as our sister said, and still we rise. With all of that, you know. And so there is that. If we talk about, what do we talk about reparation? We talk about reparation is a Marshall Plan for the Black community. I mean, people are going to talk about a Marshall Plan for the whole economy now because of COVID-19, but it could be a Marshall Plan for the Black community. What you talking about? How do we reinforce that? How do we bring some of the ideas of my dear friend around math literacy, Bob Moses, into play in terms of education and providing another level of opportunity for not specifically African Americans, but all students and all children as well. How do we use those ideas and everything else? How do we pay attention to? How do we build affordable housing? How do we deal with that? During those moments when at post-civil rights, and I'm saying post only, there's a delineation between the redevelopment and everything else. Those organizations like the Western Addition Community Organization in San Francisco, they fought valiantly to get some kind of concession from HUD and from the redevelopment agent. And some of them they got. And some of it they got some affordable houses. Some houses designated for people to live in and be able to pass those houses on to their families. A lot of that, I was around in 1966 at Waco meetings, Western District Community Organization meetings in 67, everything else, and watch people, ordinary citizens, fight and make demands and everything else and get some concessions. Even though the train was out of the train was going down the track. They were able to derail this train to some extent, and to some extent get some concessions as their community is being devastated now and changed and everything else. There were concessions made to Japanese. That whole Japanese center that's in San Francisco, that people come to year in and year out to see and visit and as a tourist place and everything else right in that. That all used to be housing projects in San Francisco. I remember that because I was in the 7th grade when they began. I went to little house parties in those housing projects. Those were concessions that were made. And all these different things that we tend to forget because we all sit, and most people in power sits and says, okay, the story must go on. The empire must go on. The empire must go on. And this is what's called to that attention. So yeah, absolutely. Okay. And we can find various other ways and talk about this, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think what it does, it raises the level for those formerly enslaved Africans, but all the level for all citizens in this country.
Well, certainly nothing can ever repair the emotional damage that has been done. And when you read the estimates of the financial disparities and the wealth gap, you know, it's estimated to be about it's north of $11 trillion. It's a lot of money. And of course, there are complications in terms of, you know, who pays, how it gets dispersed, who gets money. But it's an important conversation, Danny, and you know, we just cheer you on, man, to you know, keep applying your voice to it. And as you did with South Africa, and we watched the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions take shape there with some success. These issues for us are imperative if we are ever going to close that wealth gap. So we are, unfortunately, our time goes so quickly, Danny. We're getting close to the end here, but I wanted to turn the last portion of the question over to Ambassador Shabazz, and I know she's percolating with some thoughts and listening to you inspire us as you always do. But Ambassador, I'll let you take the last question, last comment here with Danny.
Well, I've been listening and I moved, and we've not, because of the distance, we've not been able to sit down and really exchange like we used to along the decades. But this is really the side of you I know, and I'm always excited when others get a chance to have an earful, a heartful of what you live, how you live, what you glean. And while we know that you're a prolific artisan, for people to realize what the resonance of your dedication to the diaspora, all of us, all of the diaspora, so there's the African diaspora, but you've been engaged in so many, as this podcast time has relayed, the cultures and the migrations and the contributions of so many of our global human citizens. And it's just bountifully beautiful and rich, and it can't be lost. And, years ago, I used to refer to you as a professor. And I think that there's some kind of sit down time. I know you're on the road, you move like I move. I would really love to find ways that there are volumes of your knowledge that's imparted upon young people. And when we talked in this conversation about the generations, you as a 9-year-old, our generation that's just on the tail end of yours, I mean, it splits a generation, and now, and what's going on. And when I think about the Gen Zers, they need to hear you. They need to know you, not your catalog on IMDb, but this catalog of life, things that you shared in part. And I'm just wondering, if you were to give or close for the listeners with words of encouragement that inspires or motivates, circulates who they are and what makes a difference to pursue their dignity with the things they want to manifest in this life. These young people are not ready to hear or rest, and we don't want them hurt or wounded as we got to witness. So what would that nugget be? What would that word to the wise be for that 16 to 30-year-old, so that we're not losing them to the indifference that they've been experiencing in the last few years? So what's the good word? What's the encouraging word?
The encouraging word is that they are the embodiment. Young people are citizens, but young people, because they're the next generation. They're the embodiment of possibilities. And those possibilities always have to be ingratiated in the spirit of struggle, of truth, and of justice. And finding that and fighting for that, not accountability. There's a difference between accountability and justice. We saw accountability happen with the police officer who was convicted for the murder of George Floyd. We saw accountability, but not justice. Justice is a process. Does accountability translate itself, transform itself into justice? We don't know. But that justice is the elusive, wherever it is, whether it's in housing, whether it's in education, whether it's in what is happening right now, sitting right here, as we see our brothers and members of my family who are incarcerated, and part of the prison industrial complex. That is about justice, and finding that arc between justice and the connection between justice within their lives, within their community, and struggling from it all knowing that all battles waged are valiant and important, and to continue to struggle. La lucha continua. The struggle continues.
That's right.
Yes. Well, Danny, thank you, man. That's powerful. And I hope we get a chance to talk to you again. I know you work so hard, you're tireless, man, and there are always a lot of demands on you. So we're just really grateful that you joined us today, man. We love you, brother, and keep inspiring us and keep doing what you do.
And you know what? There's always an opportunity to talk to you, Ambassador Shabazz, and you also, Brad. Always, I'm here.
We look forward to you returning. We need it.
Thank you. All right, Danny, take care.
Bye now. Thank you.
Ambassador Shabazz, Danny Glover is just, I could listen and talk to Danny, as much time as he has available. That's how much time I would like to give him anytime that he is available.
I agree, because over the years, over the decades, he's never short on insight unsolicited or otherwise, but so informed, so well read, so well traveled that he does have opinions and he does have viewpoints, and it comes from just a different place of having really walked the walk. And so being able to share him with the corner table audience, getting a different glimpse of who Danny Glover actually is really rich.
Absolutely. Yes. And thank you for, because you really coordinated that one. And, Danny certainly would have been on my list, but, when you called that morning and told me that you had just gotten off the phone with him and he couldn't wait to come on Corner Table Talk, that was very exciting. Yeah. And you do a good imitation of Danny. I was going to call you out on that with him on the phone, but then I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah. So. And he enjoyed experiences. I remember the days when he was a partner to the part investors to the restaurants and the endeavors. And that's what I mean. He really walks the walk. He wasn't trying to be in the front of it, but he certainly wanted to back it and support it. Well,
thank you. And maybe we get him back, in the future and hear some more from Danny. So anyway, thank you for joining me in that conversation. It was great having you as a part of it. And again, thank you for arranging the Corner Table Talk session with Danny Glover.
My pleasure.
Corner Table Talk is hosted by Brad Johnson, produced by Brad and Linda Ailes Johnson, coordinating producer Lauren Turner, theme music Life Goes On by Bryce Vine, executive producers Omar Thompson, Andrew Kalb, and Ken Johnson. Find the Corner Table Talk podcast wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, and leave a comment. Corner Table Talk is a Say It Loud Network production.